looks like our names are listed there, so we're going to line up, try to be organized here.
Right.
Yeah, so you'd be right there. So come on up. So thank you, Nick. That was interesting. We talk about, GRC as a program. We'll talk about GRC as an implementation problem that has to be solved, right? But we'll hopefully cover all that in our panel today. But I wanted to start by thanking everyone for being here. We're going to open this session up early for questions. I'll be scanning, but make a noise if we don't hear you or see you. And then, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to provide a brief introduction and just give a brief overview of their GRC program. GRC programs, in our experience, are designed very differently. And to Nick's point, are integrated to varying degrees. So if you could talk about the groups that you're coordinating as part of this GRC effort, that would just help give the audience perspective. And there may be a sense of time also that you convey in terms of what's happening today or what happened at the start of your program and where that vision is leading to, okay? So I'm Brenda Boultwood. I'm a Senior Vice President of Industry Solutions. Been with MetricStream over 4 years, working with our large accounts in North America and Europe. Before that, Chief Risk Officer at Constellation Energy. Before that, many years, a career in risk and compliance with JP Morgan, Bank One, and other institutions before that. So I'll turn it over then to Marc to give an introduction and talk a little bit about the GRC program at EDF.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. So my name is Marc. I'm a heat map officer within the EDF group, which is, as you may notice from my accent, a French-based company. With respect to our GRC program at corporate level, we have a coordination role so that to be sure that our GRC program is followed by all our direction and subsidiaries all over the world. And beyond that, one of the main issues we have to deal with today and the coming months is to be sure that the GRC program works closely with the strategy program so that risk and opportunities are dealt with together.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Aadila. I work for MMI Holdings, insurance company based mainly in South Africa. And our GRC program, the current one we're on, started in 2014. Multiple stakeholders involved, risk management, compliance, internal audit, our governance functions. Our program, where we are today, we're going live with phase 1 of our implementation on Friday, so I'm very excited about that. And we've got a few phases coming up due to deliver early in 2017. From a GRC perspective, if I think about our program and our challenges, many challenges, but the key thing for us was that we needed to get this done, link it back to MMI strategy, and make sure that we can show value from risk management.
Thank you. Belle?
Smith from Johnson & Johnson. Our journey is kind of on 3 tiers. At the upper level, as I said earlier this morning, from a credo perspective, it's really our baseline of how we do risk assessment and manage ourselves culturally, and that's been in place since 1943. But our GRC journey, as far as integrating the processes and the technology, all of the ones that Nick mentioned up there, all of those groups are part of developing cross-functional integrated view. I can tell you that we are not there yet. It's an ongoing journey because we're trying to bring lots of years of history and people together. Our MetricStream journey, where we started doing the technology rollout, really began in 2011. We starting small with a global Sarbanes-Oxley program. It was one program that we had around the world, and we needed to automate it, and so that was our beginning piece. And then we moved into some of the other compliance, risk assurance, and audit areas. Partner in crime here, Dirk Rolls, did the presentation this morning on what we did with our R&D, which is incredibly important in a pharmaceutical company for that. So it's bringing all those different groups together, but also starting to get that common vision. So it's the big vision and then doing each building block at a time. Call it the Lego program.
And well, you already know me, so Brenda asked me to just share a fun fact. So I actually share more in common with the Queen than you realize. I own a Welsh Corgi.
Oh, glad you're here, Nick. It creates a lot of bonds. So in brainstorming a bit in preparation for this panel, we've developed a number of themes that seem consistently important across these GRC implementation programs. And so, design of a GRC program is probably different than implementation, but we're focused on implementation here. So one of the critical success factors that we identified was a GRC program strategy, right? Nick talked about, aligning that with core values, core brand values. But I'm just going to point this to Aadila and ask, could you talk about, the program strategy, how it was developed as you incubated this idea in 2014? And then, we'll have, the format will be that other panelists will comment, agree, maybe disagree. And maybe, Belle, you might be equipped on this one, especially to build off of Nick's point about the importance of intangible assets. I'll throw you that. It's a bit of a trick question, but as you think about the program strategy.
So, Brenda, thank you for that. If I think about MMI strategy, we had to build our GRC program strategy on a sound business case. Our business case was combined assurance. So for people who are not familiar with combined assurance, it's a term that was coined by Mervyn King, chairperson of the King Report and the King Committee in King 3, and recently in King 4, talks about integrated assurance. So making sure that when you've got governance, risk, compliance professionals and capabilities, that they work harmoniously together to deliver on business value. In times when there's economic uncertainty, regulatory pressure, you need to make sure that the investment you put into a risk management, compliance, governance program will give the organization the benefit they're looking for. Organizations are not looking for tick box exercises. They're looking for value-adding, strategic insight, data analytics, and we realize that we cannot do that on our own. We need appropriate technology to enable that. So a key program strategy also, and one of the ladies in the audience asked me this, was to say, start with the basics. Make sure that you've got a good risk culture in place, that people know what they're doing, and then go into the automation of that. So those of you who attended my presentation just before this, I spoke about how we designed thinking about combined assurance and then overlaying that with the technology strategy.
Thank you. Marc, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Brenda. On our side, our strategy was really to be sure that the GRC program was embedded to the activities and not apart from the activities. If we want to be successful, we had a clear idea that we needed to help the people, to help all the involved people within the GRC. And if it comes as another activity apart from the usual and operational activity, it won't be successful. So that was our main strategy with respect to this implementation.
Thank you. Belle, do you want to?
And similarly, but a little bit different from a healthcare company, the focus for us is entirely on the customer. And so everything we're doing, tangible, intangible, is around that trust with the customer. And so as we're doing anything in the space related to risk, whether it's at the compliance part of risk or the governance piece, it's how do we tie that back to our customer and making sure that we're consistent with that all of the time. And that's at the baseline of the entire strategy. And then executing against that is really where you have the individual smaller projects.
Okay, great. And Nick, as you did your research, into the themes you presented, did you see a difference between financial institutions and non-financial institutions in the extent that they emphasize the customer focus?
It's interesting. No, there's not much of a difference. Across industries, even ones where you don't think that there's necessarily a business to consumer, a B2C market where it's more B2B, even in those cases, there are customer-obsessed organizations and non. And so for that reason, it's just a different focus on who your customers are and the pain points that they may have. We have a huge research wing that also focuses just on customer experience, on customer journey mapping. And what that means is basically that you help identify all the different touch points that your customer has with your organization. And so through that customer journey mapping program, you bring on customers throughout all of the stages where they find out and discover your brand, where they actually interact and buy services, to where they're renegotiating products and different interaction points. And so it can be anything from a financial institution to a logistics company, and you all have customers, and the experience that they have with you will define whether they're going to continue to do business with you or not.
Belle, this morning on the panel, you spoke a little bit about what you called the J&J credo. And as we talked, you've mentioned that it has been important to your GRC implementation to tie the benefits of GRC to that credo. Can you explain what that means and how you did it?
Sure. So again, the credo is really the norms around decision-making project culturally, ethically, and from an integrity perspective. So that's kind of the baseline for everything. And it's what's good because it ties the 60 different countries and all the different people around the world. It's something that's common. But where that kind of made the jump into the strategy piece is if you start to talk to everyone and everyone has understands the credo, and you start to talk about the things that you do in your personal role. So you get it down to the individual person. What are you doing in your personal role, and what are the goals you're trying to accomplish? And look at risks at saying, what's in the way of you being able to do that, either helping you to do it or hindering you from doing it, and getting people to think about it in the context of their personal role in it. I think you mentioned earlier, you mentioned GRC and the eyes glaze over. And so it's coming to the point of, what does it mean to you and why should I worry about it? And so you have some people in their role, everything is compliance because that's, where they are in the function. And you have other people who are very strategic and they're really thinking in that level. And so if you can get to each one of their individual goals and say, okay, baseline from a credo perspective, we know we've articulated your goals in terms of that. Now, how do we say what else might be in your way to keeping you from doing that? And it's helped us have some of the conversation. Again, you have to kind of bring over every person one at a time because every individual has to decide they want to be in or be out,
Right. I'd like to add on to that too, I think that's great points. Oftentimes what I advise organizations to do at that high strategic level is to mitigate risks closest to your brand's North Star. So a North Star is a marketing term that essentially means the core brand value or purpose that your brand stands for. And so from a risk perspective, what are the things that can go wrong to those core brand values? Because those are going to be, if those events or if those issues take place, those are going to cause the most damage to your organization. So to mitigate those risks, you can take a very simplistic approach at a high level with your executives and ask them two basic questions. The first one is, what are you doing today that you shouldn't be? And CVS is a great example of that. And secondly, what aren't you doing today that you should? And actually Coca-Cola is a great example of that, where back in 2007, they decided to pursue a strategy where they would replenish 100% of the water they use in their finalized beverages. And that is a huge amount of water. I think it's 160 billion liters of water just in their finalized beverages, and then you double that to actually manufacture it. The numbers are somewhat, anyway, it's a lot of water. And so they set a goal that by 2020 that they would replenish that water, just like kind of you do carbon trading, carbon offsetting, but do it for water. And they realized that the reason that they needed to do this was it was so intrinsically tied to their core products and services and what they were doing. I don't know if you're familiar with, many of you are probably familiar with the situation that happened in Flint, Michigan, where it turned out that there was lead poisoning that led to just a number of issues with irreparable damage done to individuals and kids. It's really, really sad. If you take that type of scenario and think, what if Coca-Cola or Pepsi had a distribution center there? Their brand and reputation would be completely deteriorated. If you build up this resilience, if you start thinking about the approach that they took to start saying that they are now going to replenish that water, it is a core strategic initiative that they make sure they do everything to help get their communities, the globe, better clean access to water, that helps build resilience around their brand where they can actually stand up and say, we've already been trying to do this and we can take everything, we will do everything we can to help out this situation. But having that foundation is a core preventative measure where if they didn't have that, it would be way worse of a scenario. Again, all of that's hypothetical, but that's the type of situations that you have to start thinking about.
Aadila, let me throw this at you. So, in healthcare, we can think about, as Belle talked about, tying to credo, core, integrity, trust, those types of values. And Nick gave great examples of sustainability at Coca-Cola and then, things they shouldn't do at CVS that they were doing. But how would a financial institution tie their GRC program to their core values?
So from an MMI perspective, we have tied our GRC program to the core values. So MMI's financial purpose and, it's financial wellness. So we want to make sure our customers, our communities, our businesses are financially well. We're not just in the business of selling insurance. We want to make sure that we're selling you a product that you need that will provide for you through your lifetime and when you are not here. It is so important that integrity is one of our key values. So we've got 6 key values, but integrity is the heart of our organization. If we can't demonstrate integrity to our clients, we don't have any clients. And GRC is really about bringing that integrity to say, this is what we do, this is how we do it, these are the risks we manage, these are the risks that we are thinking about, even though they're not affecting our company at this point in time. And it is important to make sure that if you can demonstrate integrity to your clients, you will get trust back. And trust is one of those intangible assets that, once lost in an insurance company, can never be regained.
Marc, any comment from you from the world's largest nuclear provider, nuclear power provider?
One thing, for us, such a program is very helpful to be sure that we always improve our risk management system. We might not rely of what we already performed. We have the goal to be always better. We need to be always better. And with respect to that, Nick, we enjoy asking a third question to our executive teams, which is, what are the biggest surprises you have to cope with in the last period of time? Because with respect to that, it enlightens us with our weaknesses with respect to mix management and the points where we need to improve.
That's a great example. I like that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's also one where it's the time horizon you're thinking about. If you think about compliance, a lot of times compliance is a long term, but a lot of times around shorter term events. And I think to your point, as you start to think longer term about what's happening in the environment, in the business, and to the digital, what's happening, the tangible and intangible. If you start thinking about what can go wrong there, you get away from being just so close to it where your reaction time is slow. And really the benefit of GRC is that you've now got some scenario planning and you're actually thinking about that longer term. And I love that. That's a good...
segue to something else we talked about as a critical part of our GRC success factors, and that is our change management program, right? And in a change management program, how you have to have that time horizon. So, Aadila, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you instituted that change management program as your GRC program was getting started.
So I mentioned earlier as well that our change management began even before we had started our GRC program. We had embedded risk management in the organization and we'd reached a plateau. We were only able to do so much and get so much insight from the complexity of data and where the data was, if it was to be found in the first place. So change management began when we started our GRC program, saying we're looking for new, innovative ways to do things. We got our marketing teams involved, we got our HR teams involved, we designed an entire brand around our GRC program to create energy. We had desk drops, we had competitions that we ran just to make sure that we maintained enthusiasm. But at the same time also we realized that when we have a GRC system from an implementation perspective, people's jobs are going to change. And we had to prepare our teams, and we're still preparing our teams for life after a GRC system. I mentioned a statistic that in my days of doing risk reports, I probably spent 3 months putting reports together. A GRC program is going to be able to do that for you because your data is there. You can get great dashboards. You can create great management information. Now what? So those 3 months, what are you going to do differently? And that change management is really, really important, because if you can't create that enthusiasm and create the capability within your teams to be able to do something else with that time that's created, it will cause your program to fail, because they will inherently start sabotaging your implementation because they realize, but hang on, I've lost a bit of job security now. So what does this mean for me? And that is a key thing to say. This doesn't mean that you're not important. It just means you're going to do things differently with the time you have available.
Thank you. Belle, do you want to comment? Johnson & Johnson?
Dead on. It's that whole shift between people who are data collectors versus people who are doing data analytics. And not everyone can make that shift. And your perfect point is that if you don't take care of the people and give them new training, help them find other job opportunities, something to bring it all together, you end up with a detractor rather than an enabler in the process. But thinking about that is not an easy step, because you're in the middle of trying to do the program and stepping back and saying, okay, now I'm going to help these people that I have to go and retrain. It's not something you put in your original project plan in most cases.
Right.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting that both of your programs have involved marketing, right? You've gone outside to help with the messaging, the communication, and more broadly that change management and the preparation of the mentality, right? How are people going to face the new day, in their new environment, right? Marc, would you like to add anything as you think about it?
You're smiling.
Yeah.
I think that such a program has to be made by the people for the people. We made sure that the people were included in the program since the early stage in the program, since the early thoughts. So that to be sure that at each step we really met all the expectations, or at least the majority of the expectations of the people. I really like what you said, Aadila, with respect to the impact of your job. I had the same thing. We went live in August, and up until now, I spent, like you, 3 to 4 months to gather data so that I can build some dashboards. And now with such a program, it's fully direct, and my job's changed. My job is another job. It's 3 or 4 months now of analysis, of deep analysis, and the added value is there because you have a team, a dedicated team, which does not try to get some data somewhere. The team has the data, and now can really spend all the time to perform deep analysis. So the added value for the company is there, and this is very important.
And Marc, that is an intangible benefit of GRC, to say that, well, now that we've got a system, management actually can have some strategic discussions with us as risk management professionals.
And I think if I could summarize what I've heard is, it's the change management that really helps to bring that end user adoption and bringing the right mentality into this new world. But then also, kind of preparing people for how their job will change, and the fact that instead of data collection, they're going to come in and do data analysis and hopefully draw conclusions. And then there becomes perhaps the HR challenge of, do you now have the right people in the right roles? And, and that begs another set of questions. But Nick, do you want to comment on what you've seen in terms of successful change management?
This one mantra is sticking with me, and I think it's really pertinent to what all three of you have said. It's shifting from being the Department of Know, N-O, to being the Department of Know, K-N-O-W. So I think that's really important in terms of thinking about it from that perspective.
Very good, Nick. Thank you. Okay, good. So another key factor, and it's been mentioned in earlier panels, is governance, of course, of the program at all levels. So, Belle, maybe you could kick us off just by talking about, kind of how was this GRC governance program set up, and how has it evolved a bit?
We originally started out with it was a vision. They were trying to take the vision and shop the vision. And we had an executive group who became a steering committee. And essentially, we did a maturity workshop with them for them to kind of get a common understanding of where each other was on the vision. And it was a really interesting piece because we got a lot of insights that people thought they were much more mature, but they were mature in their domain, not necessarily from an enterprise level. And then from the rest from a governance perspective was then having different governing groups between the technology and actually managing the projects, but having an integrated team of people. Again, because J&J is very decentralized, we need to have cross-functional partners and make sure that they had come together in an overall governance team, and then with the vendor and making sure that there's that common understanding. Because if you don't have the collaboration, then the kind of the projects fall apart on the end. And so that has been very good from the process perspective, and then we have the technology perspective. And I'm constantly fighting to try to keep those two things together, because from the process perspective, it's a much larger group with many more domains, all the domains you had on your list there, plus a few more, and they all have their programs. So getting that alignment, a lot of it is first building that awareness of a cross-functionality, and then continuing to try to share it. I spend my life connecting dots.
Yep. And sometimes a formal structure can help you do that, not just as you're kicking off your program, but as you're managing its life and maturity as well. Aadila, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I think when you do GRC, you work with very strong-willed individuals and teams, and everyone thinks they're right. Sometimes some of them are, and sometimes some of them are not. And what we found that collaboration became important. So because we had 3 distinct teams, risk, audit, compliance, trying to get their way of work into how GRC was done, that when we gave each of them their own piece of sunshine to say, well, you can go and do this really well and collaborate to finalize that view, that it created a lot of enthusiasm to say, well, you know what, everyone's got their place in the sun, and we, similar to what Belle has, we also created a dedicated focus for designing our combined assurance requirements, and then a different dedicated focus for saying, well, how do we provide a solution for this? Is it an automated solution, or is it perhaps just a change in the way of work? Because not everything is also automation. Sometimes you just need to think about doing things differently.
Thank you. Okay, great.
An example of that, too, just to add on, is thinking about different types of risk, too. One of the questions that we get the most today from our clients is around third-party risk management, how to do that better. When you start to break that down, it can mean so many different things to different functions. So when you start talking about third-party risk to a security professional, they start thinking about security vendor and IT vendor risk management. If you ask someone, in procurement, they're going to start thinking about the contracts. If you start talking to someone in supply chain or product distribution, all of a sudden it starts to get around a conversation around supply chain resiliency. And all of those are integral in terms of thinking about your third-party risks. But having a coordinated approach means that you're able to bring in those different perspectives to help really think through what the ultimate and underlying risk is.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Belle.
To build on that with the third parties, if you think about every third party, it's a mini version of what you have at GRC, because almost every single one of those risks can potentially apply to it. So you have to have a framework in which you're getting those insights into the contracts and how you manage those vendors. And so it's a big multiplier when you start getting out there. And then when you look at it at second, third, and fourth tier vendors, the risks really multiply, but you really have to think of it in that holistic sense.
Okay, Thank you. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and just build on something Aadila said earlier. You know, you have people that will be on board your GRC program and those that may take a little bit longer, but they all have strong opinions, right? They've gotten to their point in their career because of those views and their hard work and ethics and so on. But, you know, ultimately, you know, as a program lead, you have to start thinking about what are you going to do with the GRC resistors? And this was a phrase we coined, but, you know, whatever you call them, they exist in organizations. And sometimes one of your challenges, especially in managing your own time, is how you're going to deal with these GRC resistors. What do you do? And you know, what's the easy path? And sometimes you have to take extreme measures. So, Aadila, do you want to, or maybe Belle, why don't you kick off and just talk a little bit about
Yeah, okay. So one of the first things I try to do is listen. Trying to understand why they have an issue. Is it because that I don't understand where they're coming from? Is it that there's a nuance in their process that they particularly owned, and so now I'm stepping on their territory? Is it they're concerned about their careers? So a lot of it is a listening, and sometimes it's just people don't like other people. And they're saying, you know, let's be frank here, I don't want to work with, you know, this group of people. And so then you have to, you know, decide, you know, from the leadership perspective, are you going to, you know, spend time and energy to try to bring them around? And it's always best if you can bring people around, because then you're some of your best advocates. But, you know, there's sometimes when you have to say, wait a minute, this is, you know, stopping us from being able to move forward. But I think the very first one is listening, because usually people have a good reason why they don't. And I find it's that, you know, I didn't understand where they were coming from. So if you take that time, it's usually worthwhile.
So, Belle, to add on to that, what I've seen with resistors is often that lack of understanding. So they don't quite understand why we're doing this. So why do we need to change something that's been working for a long time? It's really not necessary. And, you know, from a resistor perspective, because we've got a fairly decentralized organization, we saw through our program that those resistors, they usually succumb to peer pressure. So if there were enough people who believed we were doing the right thing, they would win those people over. Because it's not something you can force down from an executive level. People will either follow you like sheep or resist you all the way to the end of your program. And usually, if you win those resistors over, they are the key influences for the rest of the group. Because if you can win the skeptic over, then you've won your challenge. And I personally spent quite a bit of time with one or two resistors to help them to understand where we were going. Because once I'd won one of those two people over, they actually started influencing everyone else.
So Marc, do you have a comment? You mentioned earlier, I'll change the wording, but very French. You said, you know, it's got to be GRC by the people, for the people, something like
Yes,
that.
yeah, right.
So can you comment? Do you have resistors? And,
yes,
you
of
know.
course, as everybody, I guess. I think you have to be very pragmatic. This is what we try to do since the beginning of the program, to make sure that we, all the people, at least majority of the people who are involved since the early stage, to avoid such resistance from people. That's the first point. Second point, as Belle said, you have to understand why people may resist. So usually it came to such question that why should I change? So what is the sense of going through a GRC program? Or, okay, I would like to change, but it will give me quite a bunch of work because I have my data in my former way of working, and now what do you want me to do with my data? So one way of dealing with that is take the time, be sure that you have the time, and organize yourself so that you can take care of the data of the other people. So that they don't have to take care of their data, and once they are into the GRC program, they will find their data. It's quite basic, but it works from my point of view. And the last point is that we are not alone. You have resistors, but you also people which are strong promoters of the GRC program. So you can rely on them to help you to deal with resistors.
Okay, thank you. And so you might be able to tell that there are quite a few scars, you know, of GRC program implementation. And we just asked, you know, if everyone could provide their bit of advice, but maybe start with, you know, Belle, you know, could you comment on, like, if you had to have 2 roles or 3 roles on your GRC program that, you know, you advise every company to have, you know, because otherwise you're just going to fail. What would you say?
Yeah, pretty emphatic about that. If you don't have a really good business analyst, and I talk about a business analyst as someone who really gets into the detail and really understands the business and enough of the technology that they can be bilingual and be able to speak across the groups, that person or persons are invaluable. If you can have a business analyst as well as an IT business analyst, so you have a partners, that very, very valuable, because they take the theoretical and make it real for people. And without them, you spend a lot of time going around and around. The next one is the project managers. Your project managers, there's a term used earlier today, is being able to herd the sheep. You have to have a project manager who can drive and keep everyone together. Again, similarly, if a project manager and from the technology side and a project manager from the business side, so they kept together. But one has to have the key role of the integrated project plan. But without those roles, we found it would just kind of, a lot of time and effort would get lost. And so today, when I talk to anybody in the business who wants, I said, if you don't have a good business analyst and you don't have a project manager dedicated to you, don't do your project.
Okay, great. And you talked about an integrated project plan. This was something we talked about as well. So it's the point is, it's not just technology, right? We talked earlier about change management program. We talked about
data migration,
data migrations,
yeah,
right? This is a fairly complicated plan,
yes,
involving many stakeholders, right? Some you would think, you know, would be part of the GRC program integration, but other times pulling groups like marketing, communications, you know, into that project plan to ask them to do what they're best at.
Your project manager needs to have enough of a knowledge of the organization to know when to ask for some of these other people, or designate that, hey, we're going to need some of the other players. It's very much it's the orchestration piece, you know, being able to do that through. And then of course, obviously, if you don't have strongly at the top with a strong business passion, you're not going anywhere. So that's a given. But underneath that, you really need at least those 2 roles.
Aadila, what advice would you give to the teams?
You with Belle, I think from our perspective, having a very strong BA and having a project manager who could think on her feet, but who was also able to step into the role of a BA or an IT BA when there was one missing. It's very, very important. And if possible, to put a team together that can actually work with each other, because there's nothing worse than having really great professionals, but they just cannot see eye to eye with each other. I tell you, I have some scores from our implementation, and I'll happily share them offline. But it was one of those things that early on we realized that if you don't have the right people on your team is going to fail.
Yeah. Marc, you want to add to that?
I agree with just what Melania said. You have to have a strong project manager, and you have also to have IT people embedded within the project with a strong relationship between the project line and the IT people. Otherwise, you will miss the target. Your project manager also has to be aware of all the business line, has to be aware of all the different way of working the issue that already exist within the different business lines. Otherwise, here again, especially for big companies, you may miss the target.
Okay, thanks. So it sounds like it's coming down to people, right? As it always does. But Nick, what did we miss based on your research in terms of success?
I was thinking about the question, and the one thing that kept coming to my mind is really in a GRC implementation, try to focus on the end user experience as much as you can. take an outside-in approach. If GRC wasn't your job and you were asking people to fill 30-page risk assessments or to go into a system that wasn't intuitive, I can understand why there are GRC resistors. Like, it makes sense. Like, there are a lot of people that are resisting just because they know what it means to them and from past experiences. So the more that you can simplify your processes, the more that you can build a technology platform that really focuses on ease of use, intuitiveness, all of those ways and aspects around end user experience, both from a technology perspective, but also from a process perspective, I think that is, the number one thing to focus on.
To add to that, I think one of the things that gets missed is the data. Starting with what data do you want to be able to report on? Because if it doesn't exist anywhere, you got to get some kind of a project to create it. So being able to get down to not only starting with the end in mind, but the end in mind down to the what data am I going to want to report on? And that seems to get missed a lot, and it's where you can add huge amounts of time to a project without.
Yeah. Great, so thanks, lots of ideas here. We'd love some questions from the audience. We have microphones floating around, so please raise your hand, and as you ask your question, please introduce yourself. So there's a question right here. Of course, it's on the front table. The microphone's coming from the back. Okay, 1 second. There you go.
Abdurrahman Albayz from Saudi Airlines. The question that I see, the focus is on the R and the C, the risk and the compliance. And sometimes I don't hear or I don't see even the platforms that helps in the governance part. Governance to me is that we have the processes defined, integrated correctly, the RASI, everybody knows it, and the policies are documented, and there is a process to manage all of these. I want to hear from the audience more about these things. I don't know, maybe it exists properly before you have this GRC in your companies, or there is something missing.
Yeah, you're 100% right. In a wonderful world where it should be, all of that should be totally defined before you get into any of the technologies or anything you want to do going forward. I think for us from a governance has been, unfortunately, we have a lot of very strong people that have the ability to invest in technology without necessarily including it from an enterprise perspective. Again, remember, we're very decentralized. And so one of the things that we've done is we jumped into the GRC without 100% of that defined, aligning, saying we would try to get people at least on a common platform rather than having everyone go out and create their own technology piece. So in an ideal world, absolutely, you're 100% right. Your processes, your portfolio, all of your policies, all of that should be done, and decision points, where that has to go should definitely be in place. If you have an organization that's going to move anyway, and you can either try to bring the train along, or you can go and wait 5 years and pick it up down the road. So dead on, it's just, unfortunately in our case, we had to start somewhere in order to be able to be part of the evolution as it's going forward.
Our GRC program actually started at the point of developing appropriate board governance structures, appropriate policies. So that all took place before we embarked on a technology GRC program. And that probably took us about 18 months to really go through every different type of risk, enterprise risks, and make sure that we got the value that we were looking for from a management, a board, a regulatory perspective. And then we kicked off our automation to say, well, we've now defined our policies. We know what we want. We know what value we want to get. But it is a key critical enabler to get the tone at the top right. So without culture, you won't get the right policies. And then without the right policies, you cannot get to the right value add.
Marc, do you want to add anything?
Yes, on our side, the governance was strong already when we made the decision to go to the GRC program. Even if it was strong, we needed to take time to know very precisely what we want to achieve with respect to the GRC program and what we did not want to achieve. And I think this is a key point of successful implementation. You have to take your time before to clearly know what you want and to clearly know what you don't want. And it is not so easy.
It's not so easy, and kind of defining that, articulating it, but also marrying it with the processes you have around governance, the policies, procedures, and what's expected to fulfill those. But then kind of the benefit from GRC should be the issue tracking. Someone mentioned it on an earlier panel, but just that ability to manage issues in a central way and track completion of actions and know which businesses, which regions are actually most compliant or responding well. But it's a great question. Probably some papers still need to be written, but it's not something that's uniform across every company, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think that governance is probably, of the three letters, is one that touches every other part and is integral to every aspect of risk and compliance management. And so when you start thinking about governance, it does come down to a couple key things. And one is that strategy that you were talking about, is when you're thinking about building or implementing a GRC program, is defining success up front. So thinking about what is going to make up a successful program or successful initiative a year from now. And setting those metrics at the beginning can help you remain accountable to whether that actually plays out or not. It helps you define how you're going to hit that, how you're going to build the right roadmap, the resources you need. All of that is built on a strategy around making sure that you actually define that strategy, set those key success metrics, and then hold individuals and yourself accountable for them. And so a lot of it, again, ties into that idea around accountability, which I think is, again, key to GRC. So the second element of that is really making sure that you assign and designate clear roles and responsibilities. Having that 3 lines of defense is critical. And with the major corporate scandals that we've seen of late, like Wells Fargo, for example, I can go on a full list, but basically the 3 lines of defense deteriorated. Internal audit maybe didn't have as strong of a separation from compliance. It didn't have as strong of a separation from the second line. So how do you make sure that you give purpose to each of those lines of defense and you coordinate that all together by defining and ensuring accountability?
Great question. Any other questions in the audience? Yes, great. The microphone. Do you mind passing just over to the next table here? Right here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nick. I'm from Zurich Insurance. My question is really around implementing the GRC program. Did this give you an opportunity to look at your processes and perhaps see whether or not it was lean enough, it was robust enough? So I guess what I'm really asking is, was there an opportunity to kind of, go down to the basics and relook how your methodology looked like? And then also, I guess my second question is, to what extent did you engage with the users? So aside from your team, who are like the GRC team and implementing it, how about the end users? Were they consulted? Did you, engage with them? And how was their reaction? How did they take this on board?
Nikki, our entire program was based on collaboration up front. So MMI had 2 failed starts to a GRC program before I got involved. And the key thing we did up front was to create buy-in when we started with our vendor demonstration. So we had 20 or 30 people there from our risk compliance audit communities participating in the process to make sure that they got the user experience that we're looking for. One of the key things in Nick's presentation earlier, and also my presentation, that user experience was our #1 need. That there's lots of GRC programs and providers out there. We needed to find the one that appealed to us, made it exciting, that made people want to use that system. so that was a key thing for our entire program. It helped us with our success to date. And definitely one of the things we did was relook at how we do work. So what we found that, and I'll use one example, risk control self-assessments were being done by all three parties, risk, compliance, audit, and management, and we realized that we're doing it very differently. So we said, can we find one standard that everyone can use? We can gather the most data that we can from an intelligence perspective, and then redefine our way of work.
I think when you look at even the top programs in terms of maturity, there are things that they want to do better or more efficiently. And so it just really depends on where you are in that maturity level, because you can take a look at your program, and I think I'm kind of focusing on the first part of your question, which is, can you take a look at and think through what are those key aspects of your program, and can you take a fresh perspective and look at what GRC is? And I think that's something that has to happen on a regular basis, because as I talked about at the beginning, so much of our external environment is changing. There's so much digital disruption, there's so much market volatility that is outside of our control, that is shifting the way and shifting the priorities that GRC should be focused on. It's also shifting in terms of the demands and requirements of our business leaders that are asking for different information, maybe more frequently, and what is a critical risk for them as their corporate strategies change. So we have to be constantly taking that perspective and re-looking at it.
Our panelists will all be here for drinks afterwards, we're hoping, but a big thank you to Marc, Aadila, Belle, and Nick for a great panel. And turn it over to Ian.
Thank you very much.